Everyone hears the phrase dam emergency and thinks the same thing. Too much rain, too much snowmelt, too much water. Right now, the water is rising toward the evacuation trigger, while the hydro station that could help move more of it out is not running. At Cheboygan, there is already a published protocol for what happens as the water climbs. At 12 inches, residents start packing. At 6 inches, they prepare to leave. At 1 inch, the evacuation order goes out. As of Sunday afternoon, April 12th, the water was 15 inches from the crest. The dam is moving toward its evacuation threshold, while part of the system that should be helping relieve pressure is still offline. From a distance, this looked like the usual spring emergency picture. Record snow melt, days of rain, water levels rising across northern Michigan. The State Emergency Operations Center activated, sandbags stacked, pumps running, crews clearing debris, gates managed, press releases going out, officials telling people the situation was serious. And the water kept rising anyway. The Cheboygan Lock and Dam complex is not just the lock, the gates, and the spillway people usually picture when they hear the word dam. Right beside that state-managed structure sits a privately owned hydroelectric generation station. And that station matters for one simple reason: it moves water. In an emergency like this, moving water is not a side issue, it is the entire objective. But as of April 12th, that generation station was not operating. Officials said some water was still getting through bypass valves on that part of the structure, but bypass valves are not the same thing as a working hydro station adding real flow capacity while the reservoir is under pressure. And that is why the wording of the emergency response matters so much. When officials said they were pushing through as much water as they could, that did not necessarily mean as much water as the full Cheboygan system is designed to move when everything is working. It meant as much as they could under the conditions they actually had. That is a very different sentence. Because this is not simply a dam taking on too much water. Dams are built for inflow. This is a dam taking on heavy inflow at exactly the moment when one of the things that could increase outflow is not available. So the real question is no longer just how much rain fell or how much snow melted. The real question is how much usable margin is left when the water is still rising and the system is not operating at full flow capacity. Upstream, the warning area already included Mullet Lake, Burt Lake, the Sturgeon River, and the Crooked River. The flood warning was valid through April 19th, which meant the reservoir behind the dam was still being fed by a larger landscape that had not finished draining. Pellston Regional Airport reported flooded runways. Upstream communities like Allenson were already dealing with water intrusion. The broader flood watch covered 48 counties. So this was never just one dam in one town. It was one dam sitting inside a much larger water system that was already under stress. Because on the same Sunday night, about 150 miles south, another Michigan dam emergency was moving in the opposite direction. At Tippy Dam, operators were already releasing high flows downstream because they had too much water to hold. The same broader storm pattern had pushed one dam toward an evacuation trigger while forcing another to dump water downstream. And then there was MIO2, opening floodgates on the Au Sab with its own warnings and downstream concerns. 3 dam events, one state, 48 hours. That does not mean all 3 were the same kind of emergency. They were not. But together, they tell you something important. This was not an isolated local problem. Michigan's water control system was under stress across multiple rivers at the same time. And once you see that wider picture, Cheboygan looks even less like a simple flood story and more like a question of capacity, timing, and margin. Because the emergency protocol at Cheboygan sounds reassuring when you hear it as a sequence of numbers. 12 inches, 6 inches, 1 inch. It feels orderly, it feels like a system with room to respond. But a protocol like that only means what people think it means if the physical system beneath it is working the way the protocol assumes. And that is where the offline generation station becomes such a serious issue. If the protocol was built around a dam complex that includes both the lock and dam structure and the hydro station that contributes flow, then the meaning of that remaining margin changes when the hydro station is down and bypass valves are doing only part of the job. The numbers may stay the same, but the behavior of the system underneath them is not identical. That does not automatically mean failure becomes likely. It means the margin may not behave in the way the public imagines when they hear the official thresholds. And Michigan already knows what it looks like when a dam loses margin. Michigan has seen this before. That is why Edenville matters here. Not because Cheboygan was failing in the same way, not because collapse was inevitable, but because Michigan has already lived through a disaster where rising water, known capacity issues, regulatory history, and delayed consequences eventually met in the same place. In May 2020, the eastern embankment of the Edenville Dam on the Tippy River gave way after water levels climbed far beyond historical norms. The Sanford Dam downstream overtopped a few hours later. Around 10,000 people were evacuated. Damage ran into the hundreds of millions. Satellite imagery showed a new river channel cut by the release where no such channel had existed before. Later, the forensic conclusion used a word that still hangs over every Michigan dam emergency: preventable. That is why the FERC angle at Cheboygan matters. Back in 2018, the Commission revoked Boyce Hydro's license for Edenville because the dam did not have enough spillway capacity to pass an extreme flood. That problem had been flagged for years before the failure happened. And now, at Cheboygan, the Commission was once again part of the story, this time not because of license revocation, but because coordination with the Commission was needed to reactivate the generation station that could help move more water through the system. So the uncomfortable parallel is not that this is Edenville again. It is that once again, the question of usable capacity and regulatory timing had become part of the emergency while the water was still rising. And that is where these stories become hard to explain to the public, because the visible response can be completely real and still not fully resolve the deeper vulnerability. The workers are there overnight, the pumps are running, the sandbags are stacked, the gates are being managed, the press releases are accurate. None of that is fake, none of that is cosmetic. But if the most important missing lever in the system is still the one that is not moving, because getting it moving depends on coordination, approvals, and a process running on its own timeline, then the emergency has two clocks. One clock is the water, the other is the system, and those clocks do not move at the same speed. That is what makes aging infrastructure emergencies so dangerous. Not just the visible hazard, but the widening gap between what nature is doing in real time and what the machinery around it can actually do in response. At Cheboygan, the water was still rising, the upstream warning was still active, the evacuation trigger was still there, and the hydroelectric station that could have added more flow through the dam was still not running. So by that point, the central question was no longer just how high the water will get. It became what that remaining margin really means under these conditions. That is the story now. Not just another spring flood, not just heavy rain, not just snowmelt doing what snowmelt does in Michigan. A dam rising toward its trigger while part of the system that should be helping move more water out is still offline, in a state already dealing with multiple dam and flood emergencies at the same time. The water is still rising, the hydroelectric station is still not running, and the margin between the current level and the evacuation threshold is still shrinking under a system that is not operating at full capacity. If this story is worth telling, subscribe. We cover more of these every week.